So one of the concepts that we need to go over for animation with characters is the idea of replacements. The idea being that you have different versions of a face or different versions of a hand that can just be swapped out fairly seamlessly so your animation can continue and can look proper. So the exercise for that is I've got a finished SWF here. Right? And it's just the same kind of button with different letters. So they're all different symbols, but they're all in the exact same spot and they're all created from each other. So we've got our start file here. There's just the one movie clip. And we've got our library open here so we can see things. So step one when setting up something like this is to make sure that you're starting from the same place. You don't want to recreate things from scratch unless you're absolutely changing everything, which is rare. So in the library, you can right click on stuff and say duplicate. And I'll call it B because, going to letter B. And it's going to, right now, these are going to look the same. A, B, A, B. But if I double click on this, I can then go into here, change just that letter, and if I want to, I can change the color. So what this means is that they're based off of each other. I'm even getting the same, lightness and saturation with the color. I'm just changing the color of the color. And what that means is that these two things are not going to be identical except for the small changes I made. And that means switching them out is going to be not problematic because they're the same size, they're in the same place, anchor points in the same place, all that stuff. So in order to switch them out, I need a new keyframe because there needs to be, a change. So F6, make a new keyframe. And then I'm going to right click on this keyframe and I'm going to say swap symbol. And what happens is everything that you have in your library shows up. Now you have to make sure you're choosing the right thing, which is why you should name stuff properly. But they go into the exact same place. And what that means is that you can very quickly come up with all sorts of different things based off of, based off the original. I can go through this series of letters pretty quickly. The only thing I have to do is, sometimes with text they don't line up the same. But you can make a lot of changes very, very quickly, and they'll all be identical to each other, right? So I come over here, new keyframe. New keyframes are always identical to the previous one, so it still has this button in the exact same place. And then I can just say swap symbol, and now they look like they're in a series. And go away. Now, one other thing you might want to know about with animation, let me just draw them out here real fast. The less than and greater than keys on your keyboard, right? One's got a comma underneath, one's got a period underneath. These are your hotkeys for going forwards and going backwards in your animation. So, and by the way, the hotkey for making brushes larger and smaller is the two brackets. But I can toggle through my animation very quickly. And so one thing I can look at is I moved the C over because I had to, but I kind of maybe moved it over too much. So I can kind of go back and forth, double click on the C, maybe move it over one, and then I can go, see, that's better. All right, because sometimes onion skinning, which we can use, doesn't really do what we want it to. Like, it's not going to work in this case. Turn off. So that's how you would do replacements. So what would we need replacements for? Well, I have some examples of characters that have been designed by students for various projects. And so I kind of want to show them to you guys. So this out a little bit. For a character like this, where most of the animation is going to come from something like the face, you would make multiple expressions. And then this could all be one movie clip, and you would have different versions of it. So you'd make one and then duplicate it, and you could come up with different versions of the same face, so there's different expressions. And you can set that up in Illustrator too. A lot of people start in Illustrator. You just make sure, for example, that all these different pieces that are in this head are on the same layer, and then you would copy that here onto a new layer, and you would go that way. So you can do replacements in Illustrator, set them up here, and then put them in later. Also, a simple character like this. So again, you might actually have this separate as two separate, different eyes, different mouth. That they could even be separate from each other. But think how they do it in like stop motion, right? They have different replacement parts and they put them in. This is the same thing, only digital, and probably less of them. Let me find this character. So if you have a character with a face like this, and you need him, actually this is animated. But if you need to change what the direction the hands are, you can see these are swapped out to go different directions. So you can have replacements in a lot of different type of characters. But the other reason I wanted to show you guys these characters is because there's a couple different types of animation you can have. So one of the other ways you have to animate things, besides replacements, which is what this person would use for the face, or the eyes anyways, is to keep everything separate. So in cartoon animation, right, we can do stuff where, let's unlock him, there we go, where everything can be disembodied. That's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with having everything that's separate. Our eyes make the connection. Even if it's not a robotic character like this, you can get away with pieces being separate. They don't have to be connected. This guy, for example, these are his feet, and they could kind of wobble back and forth, but we don't need to see how it's connected to the body. That's not how cartoons work. We don't need to have that kind of logic, or at least that explicit logic. So not everything always has to be kept exactly together. Another thing to think about is hinged stuff. So this is probably the most complex character someone's ever kind of presented in this class, and it's everything that is going to make your life difficult with animation. It could work if you're in a TV production, but if you've got only a couple weeks in class, it's another story. So what's going on here is that each leg has an upper leg, a lower leg, and a foot, which means there's 3 different hinge joints in this. Plus there's 4 of them, so quadrupeds are sort of extra complicated. There's also a tail, which we'll get to in a second, and wings, plus a neck and a head and a jaw and all sorts of stuff. So as well designed as this character is, he's going to be really difficult to move around. The tail in particular, there's no good warping software, like really anywhere. No matter what program you're in, getting things to sort of wave back and forth or anything like that, this is going to stay as one piece, and basically it's just going to like move like that. So getting to that, we're going to go over hinge joints in another video, how to deal with that. But one of the solutions to something like this, or I believe, yep, getting this to kind of wave around like it's in the wind, or even changing this, would be to do what the Drop Shadow Witch does, which is redraw it. So you have a few frames of animation where this is waving around. And whether it's this or whether you draw and animate, you can actually redraw it. You can change it, but you would basically set up keyframe animation, over a series of frames right in a row, right? And you would simply make little changes to each one as you were going. All right, so things to keep in mind as you're designing characters is how they're going to move. How mechanically is this going to work? And by the way, you can go halvesies. So you can have, there's joints on these arms, but the body, if we watch it, it's actually just hovering. So there's just a cycle of animation with these pieces. They're cylindrical pieces. And then the arms will move like on their own. So there's a lot you can do to combine different ideas, make things easier or harder on yourself. So those are all things to keep in mind as you're designing how are you going to move this.